On Sextilis 15th of the 29 BC year, on the last day of her brother's 3-day triumph celebrating his victories in Illyricum, at the Battle of Actium, and over Egypt, Octavia Therina watched as her former husband's children by Queen Cleopatra were marched through the streets of Rome. Weighted down in golden chains and dressed in demeaning costumes, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus aroused the sympathy of the Roman people, who were critical of Caesar's heartless treatment of Cleopatra's children. However, to the delight of the Roman people, Octavia later took custody of the orphaned children, bringing the 11-year-old twins and their 6-year-old brother into her home, where they were introduced to their only surviving siblings, Iullus Antonius and Octavia's daughters, both named Antonia. We are also told that, for a time, Octavia shared custody of Livia Drusilla's 13-year-old son, Tiberius, educating him alongside her own son, Marcus Claudius Marcellus, who was of a similar age. Just how Octavia may have felt about educating Livia's son is uncertain, especially in light of the rumors that abounded of the tension between the two women. Though both Octavia Therina and Livia Drusilla had lived their lives against the backdrop of civil war, their characters, forged in crucibles, bore little resemblance. In most things, Octavia, who was a product of the same country lineage which brought reproach upon her brother, exemplified the traditional pursuits of a Roman matron, whereas Livia had been trained by more desperate circumstances. Living life on the run, fleeing war-torn cities, and nearly dying in a forest fire had shocked Livia into a less compliant disposition, in spite of the ingrained submissiveness befitting her ancient patrician lineage. In temperament and behavior, no two women were more different. In 54 BC, when Octavia's great-uncle Julius Caesar had pressured her to divorce her first husband so that she might marry Pompeius Magnus in the name of securing peace between the two rival generals, the young Octavia had refused, choosing fidelity to her husband. But Livia Drusilla, upon her return to Rome following the amnesty of political exiles, wasted no time in divorcing Tiberius Claudius Nero, and subsequently abandoning her sons, so that she was free to marry Octavia's brother, who was clearly a rising star. And while Octavia's second husband, the triumvir Marcus Antonius, tarried in Alexandria with his mistress Cleopatra, Octavia maintained her Roman stoicism. Choosing virtue as her reward, Octavia had continued to live as Antonius's wife in his Athens home, caring for their children, rather than returning to Rome, where her brother, master of the art of being greatly offended by the smallest of slights, would use her plight to further stoke the flames of civil unrest. Livia Drusilla, on the other hand, preferred advantage, quickly attaching her family to the true military genius behind Caesar's success, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. When Octavia's brother was about to select a wife from the daughters of a foreign king, Livia promptly betrothed her eldest son Tiberius to Vipsania, Agrippa's daughter by his first wife. After Octavia had taken in the orphan children of Antonius and Cleopatra, the distinction between the two Roman women must have become even more apparent to the public. Octavia was raising a nursery full of thriving children, a matronly virtue was highly praised in Roman tradition, while Livia nonchalantly traded upward on the ladder of influence. And though Octavia's rearing of her stepchildren is often framed as a task assigned her by her brother, her known conservative tendencies are consistent with her willingness to take on the task. Octavia had married into the conservative side of the civil war between her uncle, Julius Caesar, and Pompeius Magnus, opposing her uncle in support of the career of her conservative husband, Gaius Claudius Marcellus. Afterward, when her brother, Rome's new Caesar, had begun his own rise to sovereignty, she had publicly challenged him. When he, along with fellow triumvirs Antonius and Lepidus, had levied an exorbitant tax against the noble women of Rome, she had stepped forward in bold support of the traditional rights and welfare of Rome's women, refusing to aid her brother in his attempt to amass power and wealth. Was it any wonder Rome had looked to her to wed Marcus Antonius? Following the battles of Philippi and the deaths or suicides of many of Rome's oldest and most conservative families, Octavia had become the new face of Roman conservatism and virtue. As a second cousin twice removed of the Marcus Octavius who had fought against the populism of Tiberius Gracchus, and as the widow of the conservative Gaius Claudius Marcellus, Octavia was the obvious choice to broker a peace between her brother, Caesar, and Marcus Antonius. And hadn't Marcus Antonius also fought to uphold the conservative traditions? Even before Octavia had married him, it was Marcus Antonius who had stood against the initial attempts to deify Julius Caesar. It was Antonius who had legislated out of existence the office of dictator, having discerned the actions of both Caesar and Sulla as indistinguishable from those of a king. And rather than immediately waging war against the assassins of Caesar, it had been Antonius who had attempted to negotiate peace, despite mounting pressure from his legions and from Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, unanimously itching to purify their swords in assassins' blood. All along it had been Antonius, like Octavia, who had demonstrated an adherence to the virtues and tenets of traditional Romanism. And despite the fact that Marcus Antonius had already fallen in love with the Egyptian queen, who had given birth to his twin children, the Senate, legions, and people of Rome had all pressured him to marry Octavia, a pregnant widow mourning the loss of her own late husband. And so it came to pass that for the sake of the nation, Octavia Tharina and Marcus Antonius accepted their shared duty to secure the peace, entering into a marriage neither of them had pursued. Each likely consented to whatever complications accompany such a marriage, and civil war was avoided. Octavia, who had 3 children from her first marriage, gave 2 more daughters to Marcus Antonius, whose children included a daughter from his first marriage, 2 sons from his second, and his twins with Cleopatra. But when Marcus Antonius returned to Alexandria and the welcoming arms of Cleopatra, it was not Octavia, but her brother who had turned the Roman people against him. While Antonius had lingered in Alexandria, Octavia had looked the other way, busying herself in wifely pursuits in Athens until her brother made it impossible for her to do so by stealing her husband's last will and testament from the house of the Vestals, and using the information therein to sway the Senate into declaring war against Egypt. Yet, was the information presented to the Senate by her brother actually the unadulterated truth? Caesar had had the document in his possession an entire night before unveiling it in the Senate chamber. Was it realistic to think that Marcus Antonius had bequeathed to Cleopatra the entirety of the Roman Empire, which was not his to give? And was it believable that Antonius had disinherited his Roman daughters by Octavia, acknowledging as his heirs only the Egyptian children he had fathered with Cleopatra, allegations which conveniently confirmed the accusations against Antonius which her brother had made for 2 years. Immediately on the heels of her brother's blasphemous actions against the Vestals of Rome and Marcus Antonius, Octavia received an unusual tribute for her service to country, all thanks to her benevolent brother. By stealing and possibly defiling the last will and testament of Antonius, Caesar had not only broken the peace, but along with it, he had shattered Octavia's marriage. In 32 BC, as her brother and her husband began preparing for the war which would ultimately be played out the following year at Actium, Octavia received a writ of divorce. While her estranged husband remained in Alexandria, his agents delivered the news of her fate in tandem with a notice of eviction from his Athenian mansion. Immediately, she and the children were forced out of their home. Although it is unclear exactly how Octavia managed to do so, she fled Athens with not only her own 5 children, but with her stepson, Iulus, over whom she had no legal rights. It seems reasonable to assume that Marcus Antonius expected his agents to escort the young Iulus to him in Alexandria, where he might be reunited with his brother, Antyllus, and meet his half-siblings, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, as well as his new stepbrother, Ptolemy Caesar. But instead, the 11-year-old Iulus was spirited away to Rome with Octavia's other children. Under Roman law, children were the property of their father, as demonstrated by Livia Drusilla's being forced to leave her sons behind when she divorced Tiberius Claudius Nero. Not only did Octavia have no legal right to take her stepson, but from the moment she was divorced, she was also expected, by law, to surrender custody of her 2 Antonian daughters. Yet, Octavia arrived in Rome with her 3 children from her first marriage, as well as the 3 children who legally belonged to her former husband. Following the deaths of Marcus Antonius and Cleopatra, Octavia found herself cast as the spurned wife of a monstrous man who had been justly avenged by her caring brother, who just happened to be the same brother who had spurned his own wife, Scribonia Libo, the mother of his daughter, so that he might marry the pregnant woman with whom he had fallen in love. In his own defense, her brother Caesar claimed divine omens from the gods, who allegedly communicated their approval by dropping a pregnant hen from the talons of a flying eagle. But in the case of Marcus Antonius, the gods were apparently silent, as he was forced to atone with his life, and beyond, sentenced to punishments which extended even to his descendants. The honor of exacting these punishments was given to the son of Marcus Tullius Cicero, who fought at Philippi with Brutus and Cassius, but was afterward pardoned by Caesar Divi Filius and served as suffect consul for the latter half of the 30 BC year. It was this son of Cicero who had announced the death of Marcus Antonius to the Roman Senate. Because of the role Antonius had played in creating the proscriptions which saw his father, Marcus Tullius Cicero, beheaded, an execution Caesar now claimed to have fought against Antonius to reverse, the younger Cicero was given the final act in the punishment of Marcus Antonius. In addition to removing all the statues of Marcus Antonius that had been erected throughout Syria and Asia, the son of Cicero passed legislation within the Senate forbidding that any boy born into the family of the Antonii ever be given the name Marcus. And so, in the aftermath of the civil wars, it was Octavia who now mercifully cared for the last of Rome's Antonii, the orphaned children of Marcus Antonius, whose reputation, even in death, continued to be assaulted by the narratives of her brother. Octavia's eldest daughter by Antonius had been betrothed to the son of Lucius Domitius Aenobarbus, a marriage arranged before the deaths of Aenobarbus and Antonius. But for her second daughter by Antonius, Octavia likely expected to have a difficult time finding a family willing to embrace a daughter of the now infamous Marcus Antonius. And as the families who survived the civil wars began jockeying for power in Caesar Augustus's new Rome, Octavia's children by her first husband, Gaius Claudius Marcellus, were quickly becoming of interest to her brother, who had thus far fathered no children with Livia Drusilla. And so, in 29 BC, when her brother triumphed before the city, it was Octavia's son, Marcus Claudius Marcellus, who was given the honor of riding with his uncle before the cheering masses, a telltale sign to the people of Rome that the new Caesar, like the Caesar before him, was looking to favor a nephew for political advancement. The year following Caesar Augustus's triple triumph, Octavia's eldest daughter, Claudia Marcella, was given in marriage to Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Agrippa had been previously married to Cecilia Pomponia Attica, the daughter of Cicero's dearest friend, Titus Pomponius Atticus. There is speculation that Pomponia may have died in childbirth, leaving Agrippa and his daughter, Vipsania Agrippina, in need of wife and mother. The marriage of Agrippa to Claudia Marcella is often framed as a gift from Caesar, who wished to honor Agrippa by making him part of the family. However, it is possible that Octavia negotiated the marriage contract in an attempt to prevent Livia Drusilla from gaining too much unchallenged influence over both Caesar Augustus and Marcus Agrippa. After all, if Octavia did not negotiate the marriages of her children by her first husband, the task would fall, by law, to their paterfamilias, who was not Octavia's brother, the lawful paterfamilias of the Julii Caesares, but was the oldest living male member of the Claudii Marcelli, should there be any who had survived the civil wars. As the Roman people began to relax and enjoy the peace which accompanied the end of the civil wars, Octavia, likewise, looked to building a better future for the children of her household. Marriage contracts still needed to be negotiated for her second Claudia Marcella and her second Antonia, and she needed to attend to whatever prospects became available for the children of Antonius. If Octavia's son, Marcellus, was truly to be favored by her brother, Caesar Augustus, then betrothal offers would be forthcoming, so long as her brother kept his promises. However, how many times had Octavia watched her brother renege on his promises to Antonius when it was his turn to reciprocate according to the terms of multiple treaties? Was it any wonder Marcus Antonius had lost faith in humanity? How many had turned their backs on him? Besides Octavia's brother, Lucius Muniatius Plancus, and his nephew, Lucius Titius, had also abandoned Antonius. And before falling on his sword, Marcus Antonius had come to believe that Cleopatra had betrayed him as well. And what of Julius Caesar? Was he the progenitor of it all? What exactly had the dictator promised Marcus Antonius in exchange for the city's plebs suddenly supporting him as potential king of Rome? Had Antonius's growing distrust of people begun on the very night he learned that Julius Caesar had named Octavia's brother as his primary heir? As the only person never to betray Marcus Antonius, Octavia Thurina may have understood her second husband better than anyone else ever cared to. Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus, Fulvia, Glaphyra, Cicero, and even Cleopatra each saw in Marcus Antonius a life-loving, lusty, and boisterous man who could be easily manipulated for the fulfillment of their own ambitions.